My name is Caroline Miller. I am 42 years old, a mother, a wife, and for most of my life, the glue that kept my family stitched together through birthdays, holidays, and reunions. People know me as the one who makes every event shine. But here's the shocking truth. After pouring years of love and labor into hosting, the very people I sacrificed for stood in my kitchen one night and voted me out of my own role. They told me I was too controlling. My own sister smirked and said no one even liked my food. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. Before I take you there, let me invite you into my world. If you enjoy stories of family drama, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to rise above, make sure you like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. That summer, before everything fell apart, I thought I was doing something beautiful. My sister Sophie was turning 38, and I wanted her birthday to feel unforgettable. We lived just outside Denver, Colorado, in a quiet neighborhood where the mountains stretch in the distance and neighbors wave when they drive by. Our backyard is modest, but under fairy lights strung from tree to tree, it becomes a place where magic feels possible. I decided it would be the perfect setting for a dinner party of 30 guests. Weeks before the event, I sat at the kitchen table with my husband David while our teenage son Ethan tapped away on his phone. I scribbled menus and guest lists on a yellow notepad. Cousin Melissa texted me her gluten-free restrictions. Uncle Frank called insisting he needed something sugar-free. I nodded and wrote it all down. This was my rhythm. This was who I was. I wanted everyone to feel seen and cared for. I tested recipes until midnight, my hands raw from chopping, my back aching from leaning over mixing bowls. Roasted chicken with rosemary, lemon kale salad, garlic mashed potatoes, a chocolate cake without sugar that actually tasted like joy. David teased me for running a restaurant out of our kitchen, but he carried the folding tables into the backyard without complaint. Ethan hung fairy lights, giving me a little grin. Looks awesome, Mom. By the time guests arrived, the house smelled of herbs and butter, the tables glowed under soft lights, and laughter spilled across the patio. Compliments flew from every corner. My cousin raved about the salad. Uncle Frank gave a rare nod over his slice of cake. For a moment, I thought I had succeeded. I thought this was what love looked like. But as I refilled glasses and scraped plates, I could not have known that before the night ended, my family would turn that love into my deepest wound. And that is where the real story begins. Tell me, if the people you loved most betrayed you in front of everyone, would you forgive them or walk away forever? I remember the moment the air shifted that night. 1 second, the patio outside was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of voices layered over the faint music. The fairy lights above our yard glowed softly, casting everything in golden warmth. My guests were eating, talking, and for all appearances, it was a success. I moved through the house in a rhythm I knew by heart, gathering empty plates, replacing serving dishes, keeping the flow alive. Hosting was second nature to me. I told myself this was love in motion. Yet as I carried another stack of dishes into the kitchen, the warmth drained from the air like someone had opened a window in the dead of winter. My mother and father were standing by the counter, wine glasses untouched, their faces grim and unreadable. Sophie leaned beside them, a glimmer in her eyes that wasn't joy. She was savoring something, though I could not yet tell what. The noise of the party outside felt distant, muffled by the tension in that small space. It was as if the three of them had been waiting for me to step into their trap. "Caroline," my mother said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass, "we took a vote." I stopped, a plate still in my hand. "A vote?" "Yes," my father confirmed, his arms folded, eyes avoiding mine. "About these dinners." I forced a smile, though my stomach turned. "What about them?" "You are too controlling," my mother said, her words quick, almost rehearsed. "You make everything about yourself. From now on, you will not be in charge of family meals." It was Sophie who delivered the final blow. She leaned forward, that smirk still tugging at her lips, and said with deliberate cruelty, "Let's be honest, Caroline, nobody even likes your food." The plate slipped slightly in my hands before I caught it. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the murmur of voices from the doorway, where some guests lingered, drawn by the confrontation they sensed unfolding. 30 faces in the house and backyard, But in that instant, every eye felt pinned on me. I should have defended myself. I should have argued or demanded an explanation. But my body betrayed me. My throat locked, my hands trembled. I stood frozen in my own kitchen, my sanctuary, the place where I had poured hours of love and energy, now turned into the stage for my humiliation. I looked to my brother Matthew, who had always been my ally in lighter moments, the one to crack jokes at my elaborate menus. He stood near the door, his gaze fixed on the floor, silent. My cousin Melissa fidgeted with her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. Uncle Frank shifted uneasily, pretending to refill his glass. No one said a word. I felt David at my side, his presence steady, his hand grazing my arm as if to ask if I wanted him to step in. Across the room, Ethan stood stiff and silent, his jaw clenched, fury flashing across his young face. In that moment, I knew both of them wanted to defend me, but I also knew what it would cost if they did. So I gave David the smallest shake of my head. This was my wound to absorb. I set the plate down on the counter with care, though my fingers screamed to slam it, to shatter it against the tile. Instead, I straightened, kept my voice low and steady, and said only, "Thank you for your honesty." My words rang hollow even to my own ears, but they were the only shield I had left. Then I turned back to the sink, running the water, rinsing dishes, pretending I had not just been gutted in front of my entire family. Each clink of silverware in the basin echoed louder than the party outside. My hands moved through the motions, but inside, a storm was raging. Every compliment I had heard earlier that night, every smile, every "this is delicious," suddenly felt like a lie. The weight of their betrayal pressed against my chest so heavily I could hardly breathe. My mother and father left the kitchen without another word, satisfied with their decree. Sophie lingered a second longer, watching me with triumph shining in her eyes, as though this was a battle she had been waiting years to win. When she finally turned and drifted back outside, her laughter floated behind her, sharp as broken glass. I gripped the counter, my nails digging into the wood. The kitchen, my place of pride, felt like a cage. I wanted to scream, to run, to demand answers, but instead I swallowed every ounce of rage. I had learned long ago that showing pain only gave them more power. So I smiled when the next guest passed through, murmuring a thanks for coming, even as tears burned behind my eyes. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I refilled drinks, scraped leftovers into the trash, and nodded absently at conversations I could not hear. My back ached, my legs felt heavy. Yet I kept moving, because stopping meant letting the dam inside me burst. David tried to take the plates from my hands once, whispering, "You don't have to do this." I shook my head. If I let go now, I wasn't sure I could stand back up. When the last guests finally left, the backyard looked like a battlefield of crumpled napkins, half-empty glasses, and fading lights. I stood in the quiet, staring at the mess, at the remnants of what I thought had been a celebration of love. My parents had left without so much as a goodbye. Sophie was gone, victorious. And me? I was left with the ruins. That night, as I scrubbed the last pan alone in the dim light of the kitchen, I realized something had shattered that could not be put back together. The family I had worked so hard to hold close had turned on me, and I could never look at them the same way again. What I did not know was that this public humiliation was only the beginning. Sophie had bigger plans, and she was already preparing her next move. I did not need to overhear my sister's phone calls to know what she was doing. Sophie has always loved an audience, and after the birthday night when my parents stripped me of my role, she suddenly had the stage. It was only a matter of time before she announced her grand vision, and when she did, she made sure I heard it. It happened a week later. I was in the living room folding laundry when Sophie arrived unannounced, her heels clicking on the hardwood, her perfume trailing through the house as if she wanted to mark the space as her own. She threw her handbag on the couch and paced like a queen rehearsing her coronation. David looked up from the newspaper, narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. Ethan slipped out quietly, sensing the tension. I remained still, clutching a towel, bracing myself. "So," Sophie began, her voice carrying the smug sweetness I had come to dread, "Mom and Dad's anniversary is around the corner. 40 years. A big milestone. And I've decided to take over. No more backyard dinners. No more paper napkins pretending to be fine dining. We're doing this in style." I raised my eyebrows, pretending disinterest, though my pulse quickened. Style? I asked. Chicago, she said, her chin lifting. The Magnificent Mile, a private dining room at one of the top restaurants, $10,000, but worth every penny. I've already made calls, met with event planners. It's going to be unforgettable. Her words were sharp, aimed to wound. She wanted me to know she could outdo me, not just with food or decor, but with money. She wanted me to feel small, like all my late nights perfecting menus and scrubbing pans were child's play compared to her luxury spectacle. David cleared his throat. That's a lot of money for one night, Sophie. She waved him off. You don't understand. This isn't just dinner. It's legacy. I'm giving Mom and Dad something Caroline never could. Prestige. I folded the towel slowly, pressing down the corners to keep my hands from trembling. I thought of the countless nights I had stayed up marinating chicken, baking cakes, arranging flowers, not for prestige, but for love. And here was Sophie, reducing it all to a competition of dollars and appearances. What exactly are you trying to prove? I asked quietly. Her smile widened. That I can do it better, that I should have been the one in charge all along. You think you're the glue of this family, Caroline, but you're not. You're just the help, and I'm done letting you hog the spotlight. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. She wasn't just undermining me. She was erasing me. Every holiday meal I had hosted, every memory I thought I had created for our family, she was sweeping aside as if it had no value. David stood then, his voice even but firm. You're talking about family, Sophie, not a corporate launch, not a photo op. Caroline gave years of herself to make everyone feel cared for. You don't get to rewrite that. But Sophie only laughed. You're blinded because you're her husband. The truth is, everyone is tired of her little performances. This anniversary is my chance to do it right. Mom and Dad agree with me. They're ready for something real. I felt something inside me harden. She called my devotion fake, my sacrifices performances, my food bland. And now she was throwing around money like a weapon, believing it could replace the years I had spent keeping this family together. I did not argue with her. There was no point. She wanted a fight, wanted me to plead or protest, to show weakness she could exploit. So I stayed silent, folding towel after towel, each crease sharper than the last. When she finally left, the echo of her heels fading down the driveway, I sat at the table and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. David poured me a glass of water and slid it across the table. She thinks money buys love, he said softly. I shook my head. No, she thinks money erases history, and she's wrong. Ethan came back into the room, his eyes wide. She's going to ruin it, Mom. You know that, right? I met his gaze and nodded. Yes, but sometimes people have to ruin themselves before they see the truth. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance as Sophie strutted around with her plans, posting about luxury venues and tastings on social media, speaking to anyone who would listen about her grand event in Chicago. She thrived on the spectacle, but underneath, I sensed a desperation. She needed this to work, not just for our parents, but for herself. She needed to prove she was better than me, that she was indispensable. I kept quiet, though inside me a storm brewed. For all her confidence, Sophie was building her tower on sand, and I could already see the cracks forming beneath her feet. And soon enough, those cracks would split wide open. It did not take long for the cracks in Sophie's grand performance to appear. From the outside, she was still strutting, still talking about her glamorous Chicago plans. But behind the curtain, her confidence began to falter. I did not gloat. I did not confront her. Instead, I observed from a distance, listening carefully to the way her story began to unravel piece by piece. It started with a call from my cousin Rachel in Minneapolis. She had run into Sophie at a cafe and told me later that Sophie could not stop bragging about a can't-miss investment opportunity. She said it was practically guaranteed, Rachel explained. Double your money in weeks, Caroline. She kept saying it was her ticket to prove she could pull off something bigger than anything you'd ever done. I felt a chill run down my spine. Sophie never invested her own money wisely. In fact, she never saved at all. If she was chasing some miracle scheme, it was bound to collapse. A week later, my mother called me out of the blue. Her voice was brittle, straining for casualness. Caroline, do you still have the number for that florist you use? Sophie was supposed to book someone, but they seem to be unavailable. I asked her why Sophie would need my florist if she had an event planner. My mother hesitated, then quickly changed the subject. The next day, my father left me a voicemail, his voice low and uncertain. Your sister may need some help with logistics. Just small things. Maybe you could step in quietly. It was in that moment that I realized the facade Sophie had built was beginning to crumble. She had promised the family elegance and prestige, but behind closed doors she was scrambling. The money she had bragged about was gone, siphoned off by a scam that had left her broke. She had poured thousands into something she did not understand, and now she was cornered. I could have laughed. I could have said I saw it coming. But when I hung up the phone, I sat in silence at the kitchen table, staring at a basket of folded laundry, and felt only exhaustion. For years, I had been the one to catch everyone when they stumbled, the one who kept the train from derailing. Now my parents were circling back to me, their safety net, as if nothing had happened that night in my kitchen, as if they had not stripped me of dignity in front of 30 people, as if their vote had never taken place. David noticed me staring at the laundry, my hands motionless in my lap. He set down his coffee and studied my face. They're reaching out again, aren't they? He asked. I nodded. And what do you want to do? I thought about it carefully before answering. Nothing. Let them find their own way out. But even as I said it, a wave of conflict ran through me. I wanted to protect myself. I wanted to refuse them the comfort they had so carelessly stolen from me. And yet, a part of me still ached at the idea of my parents' disappointment, their anger, their judgment. That was the hold they had always had on me. They knew how to push and prod until I bent. This time, though, I was determined not to bend. Late one night, my phone lit up with an email from Sophie. The subject line read simply, "Question." The body of the message was short, almost frantic. Do you think a dessert buffet counts as dinner? Also, how do you get a caterer to refund a deposit if they ghost? I stared at the words, rereading them again and again. Sophie, who had mocked me for my attention to detail, was now fumbling for scraps of advice. Sophie, who had promised she could outshine me, was beginning to beg without admitting it. I closed my laptop without responding. The silence between us felt louder than any words I could have written. The truth was inescapable. Sophie had built her ambition on a shaky foundation, propped up by ego and envy. And now, as the ground crumbled beneath her, she was clawing desperately to hold it together. My parents, caught in the fallout, were turning back to me with pleading voices, hoping I would clean up the mess once again. But I knew something then that I had not known before. Every time I stepped in, every time I fixed the disaster, I taught them that they could discard me, humiliate me, and still expect me to return. If I saved them again, the cycle would never break. So I waited. I kept silent. I let the walls of Sophie's illusion close in on her. I poured my energy into smaller things, the life I was building outside of their approval. Evening walks with David through our neighborhood, helping Ethan with his homework, listening to him grumble about geometry before he finally cracked a smile. Small, steady moments that reminded me of where my true worth lived. Still, I could sense what was coming. My parents were not going to let this go. Sophie was not going to admit defeat easily. They would come back, and they would come back hard, determined to pull me into the center of their crumbling stage. And when they did, I would have to decide whether to step back into the role they had denied me or finally close the door forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the call finally came. I was at the dining room table, folding laundry into neat stacks while Ethan worked through his math homework at the kitchen counter. The late sun slanted through the blinds, filling the room with quiet domestic warmth. Then my phone lit up with my father's name. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my hands motionless over a towel. Every instinct told me to let it ring. But curiosity, or maybe habit, got the better of me. I swiped to answer and pressed speaker so Ethan could hear. "Caroline," my father said, his voice unusually measured, "we've had a change of plans." Before I could respond, my mother's voice cut in, brittle and urgent. "Your sister isn't able to handle the anniversary like she thought. She's had complications. We need you to step in." The words were familiar, almost rehearsed, and for a second it felt like I was caught in a loop, replaying every other time they had turned to me when something fell apart. Only this time, I remembered the sting of their betrayal too vividly to let their request wash over me. I set the towel down carefully on the table and asked, "What kind of complications?" A pause. Then my father cleared his throat. "Sophie is overwhelmed. The restaurant isn't confirmed. The caterer pulled out. There's been financial confusion." Financial confusion. I nearly laughed. I pictured Sophie pacing her pristine condo, trying to spin lies into silk while her carefully stacked illusions collapsed around her. She had wanted to prove she was bigger, better, more deserving than me. Now, here they were, calling me to clean up her wreckage. My mother's voice softened, taking on a pleading edge. "Caroline, no one throws a family dinner like you. We need that cozy, warm feeling you always create, the kind of night everyone talks about afterward." I clenched my jaw, the words scraping against old wounds. Cozy and warm. That was what they called it now. A month ago, it had been controlling and unwanted. A month ago, they had humiliated me in front of 30 people, stripping me of the role I had poured myself into. And now they wanted me to pretend it had never happened. "You said I was too controlling," I reminded them, my voice calm but edged with steel. "You said no one even liked my food. Remember? That was a mistake." "That," my mother said quickly. "We didn't mean it like that. We were frustrated. But this is different." "No," I said, my voice steadier now. "It's exactly the same. Something went wrong, and you expect me to fix it." There was silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of my father exhaling, the shuffle of my mother's hand against the receiver as though she wanted to reach through and grab me by the arm. My father tried again. "Caroline, it's our 40th anniversary. Please, we're asking as your parents." I stared at the neat stack of folded laundry in front of me, each shirt and towel pressed into crisp order. How many times had I folded myself into shapes to fit their needs, silenced my pain to preserve their comfort? Too many. "And I'm answering as your daughter," I said, my throat tight but my voice unwavering. "Ask the people who voted that day. I'm not your solution anymore." Ethan's pencil froze midair, his eyes wide and locked on me. David, who had been washing dishes at the sink, turned slightly, his expression fierce with quiet pride. For once, the room was on my side, and I felt it. My mother's gasp came sharp through the phone. "Caroline, don't be cruel." "I'm not being cruel," I replied softly. "I'm being honest." Then I hung up. My hands trembled as I set the phone down on the table. My chest heaved like I had just run a mile, but underneath the trembling, there was a current of power, a flicker of freedom. I had said no, and the world hadn't collapsed. Ethan broke the silence first, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That was epic, Mom." David dried his hands and came over, placing them gently on my shoulders. "You've been waiting a long time to say that," he said. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. It felt like years of swallowing bitterness had finally burned away in one clean refusal. But as strong as I felt in that moment, I knew my parents would not let it rest. They were too proud, too used to leaning on me, too unwilling to face their own failings. And I was right, because only weeks later, their carefully laid plans unraveled in ways even I could not have predicted, and their disappointment turned into something darker, something far more public. I wasn't there the night of my parents' 40th anniversary, but I didn't need to be. I heard every detail within hours, carried back to me through hushed phone calls and pitying text messages. Even though I wasn't present, I could picture it perfectly, as if I were standing in the corner of the room, invisible, but watching the chaos unfold. They chose to host it in Minneapolis, in their own home, after Sophie's plans collapsed. It was supposed to be elegant. Invitations had been sent, promises whispered about a catered dinner, live music, and a night the family would never forget. That much was true. They would never forget it, but not for the reasons they intended. The caterer arrived nearly an hour late, hauling trays of lukewarm food that wasn't enough to feed even half the guests. People milled about in the cramped living room, balancing paper plates on their laps because no one had bothered to rent tables. My father fumbled with a Bluetooth speaker that kept cutting out, so every song was interrupted by a harsh burst of static. The decorations were sparse, store-bought banners drooping from Scotch tape, balloons already deflating by the time the first toast was made. A cousin called me later and said, "It felt like a wake, Caroline." Everyone was awkward, hungry, just waiting for someone to leave so they'd have an excuse to go too. By 9 o'clock, the house was thinning out, plates scraped into trash bags, wine bottles drained dry. My mother, usually so polished, snapped at a cousin for spilling a glass of red on the carpet. My father tried to rally the room with a speech, raising his glass to thank everyone for coming, but his voice wavered. Guests clapped politely and checked their watches. And then came the part I will never forget, because it was the part that dragged me into their disaster whether I wanted it or not. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a notification. My mother had posted on the family Facebook page a long message dripping with venom. Some people are too selfish to show up when family matters. Caroline would rather abandon us than help celebrate our milestone. She tagged my name for everyone to see. I stared at the screen, the words glowing back at me, each one a knife twisted in old wounds. My chest tightened as I imagined all the relatives scrolling, all the neighbors whispering, all the smug satisfaction on Sophie's face as she liked the post seconds after it went up. My hands shook as I held the phone. After everything they had said to me, after casting me out with their vote, they had the audacity to call me selfish for not saving them from their own downfall. The comments started trickling in. A few distant cousins added polite condolences. Others stayed silent, their absence louder than words. Then, suddenly, a new voice appeared, one I had not expected. My niece Claire. She was only 20, quiet, shy at family gatherings, never one to speak up. Yet her comment lit up the thread like a flare in the dark. Aunt Caroline doesn't owe anyone anything. She worked herself to exhaustion for years while no one lifted a finger. You all humiliated her. Maybe look in the mirror before you call her selfish. I read her words twice, 3 times, my eyes blurring with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Validation. Claire had seen. All those years, she had been watching, absorbing every detail. And now, when no one else would, she had spoken. The thread exploded after that. Some relatives quietly agreed, others stayed maddeningly neutral, but no one dared contradict her outright. My mother didn't respond, though I could imagine her fuming in silence. Sophie disappeared from the conversation altogether. I didn't write anything back. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Claire had done it for me, and her voice rang louder than anything I could have said. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of relief. Someone in that family had finally called the truth by its name. Still, the bitterness lingered. As I set my phone down, the kitchen around me blurred into the same silence I had known the night of Sophie's birthday. The same weight pressed against my chest. Only this time it wasn't humiliation. It was something sharper, a recognition that they would never change, that no apology or pleading phone call could undo the damage. I spent that night restless, replaying the images of their failed party in my head, the sagging decorations, the hungry guests, the failed speeches, the angry posts that had turned their humiliation into my condemnation. And I knew deep down that this wasn't the end. If they had dragged me into their collapse this publicly, they would come for me again. They would not stop reaching, not until they had broken me back into the role they thought I owed them. But they didn't realize that every attempt to shame me only hardened my resolve. And while they scrambled to hold together their unraveling image, I was already building something different, something stronger, with people who valued me for who I was. The anniversary had ended in disaster for them. For me, it had sparked something far more important. A chance to step fully into my freedom. And it was only the beginning. When I finally stopped checking the family thread, the silence in my phone felt strange at first. For years, every ping had dictated my life. Mom asking me to bring an extra side dish. Dad reminding me to print out place cards. Sophie nitpicking or boasting, depending on her mood. My worth had been measured in responses, in how quickly I bent myself into shape for their needs. Now my phone lay quiet on the counter, and instead of dread, I felt something unexpected. Space. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. The instinct to step back in, to fix, to smooth over the cracks was still strong. But slowly, I started pouring that energy elsewhere. It began small. A Saturday evening in our backyard with just David, Ethan, and our neighbors, Sarah and Michael. We grilled burgers, played Ethan's playlist on the speaker, and let the evening stretch without pressure or performance. Sarah teased her husband for burning the corn. Michael told a story so ridiculous, Ethan laughed until his soda spilled. No one cared about matching napkins or gourmet desserts. No one demanded gluten-free or sugar-free options. We ate what we loved. And for the first time in years, I felt like a guest at my own table. Then Claire began showing up more often. She had surprised me when she defended me online, but what surprised me more was the way she clung to me afterward. She arrived at our house one afternoon with a bag of peaches and a smile that looked both nervous and relieved. I didn't know where else to go, she admitted. We sat at the kitchen island, slicing peaches for cobbler, and she told me how suffocating it felt to live in Sophie's house, how every conversation was about appearances, about keeping up the image. She said she didn't trust her mother anymore. "You're the only adult who ever made me feel safe," she whispered, her eyes wet. I wanted to cry too, but instead I squeezed her hand and said, "Then you come here whenever you need to. My door's open." And I meant it. From that point on, Claire became part of our circle. She helped me string fairy lights one evening, laughing when one bulb popped out and flickered. "A metaphor," she joked, holding the broken bulb between her fingers. "Not every light has to work for the whole place to glow." She didn't know it, but her words settled deep inside me. I was done trying to make every person shine with my effort. It was enough to nurture the ones who already cared. Around the same time, I signed up to volunteer at the Denver Community Center. They were hosting a family night for kids in the neighborhood and needed someone to coordinate food and games. It should have felt like work, but it didn't. The gym smelled like crayons and floor wax, the tables covered in paper tablecloths and bowls of popcorn. I watched kids smear paint on their cheeks, laughing as they ran between games. A little boy in a red hoodie hugged me around the waist and whispered, "This is the best party ever!" His words pierced me deeper than all the hollow compliments I had collected from my own relatives. Driving home that night, the city lights glowing in the distance, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. All those years I thought I was building family dinners to prove my worth. But the truth was, I had been giving myself away to people who only measured me by what I could do for them. Here, at the community center, with my neighbors, with Claire, with David and Ethan, I wasn't being measured. I was being seen. The more I poured into this new circle, the lighter I felt. I woke in the mornings without dread. I cooked without pressure. Even folding laundry felt different because it wasn't tied to keeping up a performance anymore. My life was no longer about orchestrating a perfect illusion for people who would tear it down the moment it suited them. But freedom has its own price. The more I leaned into this new circle, the more glaringly obvious it became how broken the old one was. And as much as I tried to shut it out, I knew the silence from my parents and Sophie would not last forever. They had already tried once to pull me back, and they had failed. People like them do not accept failure quietly. And I was right. The calls and messages would come again, only this time they would not be asking politely. They would come carrying the weight of desperation, and they would not be willing to let me go so easily. The first apology came on a gray morning when the air felt heavy, as if even the sky had grown tired of holding back its weight. I sat at my desk with a mug of coffee, sifting through emails about community center schedules and Ethan's school reminders when I saw Sophie's name. My heart skipped once, then pounded hard against my ribs. For a full minute, I just stared at the subject line. "I owe you something." I opened it slowly, bracing myself. The message was short, stripped of the bravado that usually dripped from her words. "Caroline, I was jealous. Everyone always praised you, and I couldn't stand it. I wanted to prove I could do better, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." I read it 3 times. The first time, anger flared in my chest. The second, a bitter laugh caught in my throat. By the third, I felt nothing at all. It wasn't that her apology was cruel. It wasn't even insincere. But it was too late. A lifetime of being cut down, dismissed, and finally humiliated in front of 30 people couldn't be undone by 2 sentences typed in the middle of the night. Her words were a bandage on a wound that had already scarred. I didn't reply. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen where David was reading the paper. He looked up when he saw my face. "She finally said it, didn't she?" he asked. "Yes, and it doesn't matter." He reached across the table and took my hand. That's because you've already moved past needing it. I wanted to believe him, and in that moment I almost did. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. My brother, the one who had stood silent as our parents and Sophie cut me down, the one who couldn't even lift his eyes while I was being humiliated. His message read, "Care, I should have spoken up that night. I froze. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I sat with that text longer than I had with Sophie's email. Because Matthew's silence had cut deeper than any insult. He had been my ally once, my partner in rolling our eyes at family drama, the one who made me laugh when I was buried in stress. And yet when I needed him most, he had folded his hands and stayed quiet. His apology stung in a way Sophie's hadn't. It made me remember the exact moment I had looked at him that night, silently begging for a word, and received nothing but lowered eyes. I typed a reply twice. Both times I deleted it. The truth was I didn't know if I could forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then came the voicemail from my parents. They didn't even pretend this time. My father's voice was low, coaxing. "Caroline, we miss you. We want to reset. We shouldn't have said what we did." My mother chimed in after him, her tone brittle but dressed in sugar. "You know you're the heart of this family. We can't hold these things forever. Please come back to us." I listened to it once, then again before deleting it. The words fell flat, not because they weren't what I had longed to hear, but because I knew the truth behind them. They didn't want me back out of love. They wanted me back because they needed what I provided. My warmth, my labor, my ability to cover their cracks and make them look whole. That night, I hosted another small gathering at our house. Just Sarah and Michael from next door, Claire curled up on the couch with Ethan, the smell of brownies in the oven, laughter spilling through the rooms. I watched David grill outside while Sarah teased him about undercooking the chicken. Michael told the same ridiculous story he always did, and Ethan groaned, rolling his eyes in mock despair. Claire leaned against me and whispered, "This feels like what family should be." And I realized she was right. I didn't need their apologies to know my worth. I didn't need their approval to feel whole. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who saw me as I was, not as a tool to be used or a role to be voted away. Still, even as I smiled and laughed that night, I couldn't shake the unease. Because apologies, even late ones, are never without purpose. They weren't just seeking forgiveness. They were laying groundwork. And I knew my parents. I knew Sophie. They would not rest with unanswered emails and voicemails. They would push harder, dig deeper, and try again. The question was not if they would come back, but when, and how much damage they would be willing to cause to drag me with them. The first time I felt it, the pure, unshakable sense of belonging, I was sitting at our backyard table on a crisp fall evening. The air carried the smell of grilled vegetables and wood smoke drifting from a neighbor's chimney. The mountains in the distance were painted orange by the setting sun. David was at the grill, Ethan was setting out mismatched plates, and Claire was stringing up a set of twinkle lights she had insisted on buying with her own money. Sarah and Michael from next door arrived with a bottle of wine and their easy laughter, and just like that, the table filled with life. It wasn't fancy. There were no centerpieces, no carefully arranged playlists. The napkins didn't match, and the brownies cooling on the counter came from a boxed mix. But when everyone settled in, plates piled high, and conversation began to flow, I felt something I had never experienced during all those years of exhausting perfection. I felt free. I wasn't performing. I wasn't carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. I was simply present, surrounded by people who wanted me there for who I was, not for what I could provide. Claire leaned over mid-dinner, her voice quiet but steady. "This is better than any holiday we've ever had with them," she said, gesturing toward the laughter at the table. I followed her gaze, watching Ethan roll his eyes at one of Michael's terrible jokes, Sarah teasing David for hovering over the grill like a nervous chef, and I realized she was right. For years, I had mistaken obligation for family, but here, in this moment, I finally understood the difference. As weeks passed, our little circle grew tighter. Claire came by often, dropping her backpack in the hallway like she lived with us. Sometimes she would curl up on the couch beside Ethan, trading jokes while they watched a movie. Other times, she would help me cook, humming quietly as she chopped vegetables. Once, while stringing up lights for another evening outside, she said, almost to herself, "You're the only adult I can talk to without pretending." Her words stopped me cold. I saw in her the same hunger I had once felt, the hunger to be seen without judgment, to be valued without condition. I promised her silently that I would never let her down the way her mother had. The community center became another place where I poured my energy. I organized a small fall festival, complete with apple cider, simple games, and donated books for kids to take home. The gym buzzed with laughter, the walls decorated with construction paper leaves the children had cut themselves. A little girl tugged at my sleeve, holding up a book with wide eyes. "Can I keep this?" she asked. When I told her yes, she hugged it to her chest as if I had handed her a treasure. In that moment, I felt something crack open inside me. For years, I had measured my worth by how well I could keep my family together, by how polished and perfect I could make every event. But here in this noisy gym with sticky fingers and crayon drawings, I realized joy didn't come from perfection. It came from presence. That night, after we had swept up confetti and folded tables, Claire rode home with us. She carried a box of leftover books into the house and set it on the kitchen counter. "You know what?" she said, smiling shyly. "This feels more like family than anything I've ever known." Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed in the guest room we had started calling hers. It wasn't about blood ties or traditions. It wasn't about obligation. It was about who showed up, who stood by you when it mattered. My chosen family was smaller, yes, but it was solid, real, unshakable. And yet, even in those moments of peace, I felt the faint echo of the storm still brewing beyond our walls. My parents had not given up. Sophie's silence was too deliberate, too heavy. Every day without a call or message felt like the inhale before a scream. They had already reached out once with apologies that rang hollow, and I knew it would not be the last time. Still, I clung to what I had built. Laughter at the table, Claire's trust, Ethan's sly jokes, David's steady hand on my back when I needed grounding. These were the things that mattered, the things that reminded me I wasn't defined by the family who had betrayed me. I was defined by the ones who stayed. But just as I began to settle into this newfound peace, the past stirred again, demanding to be heard. And the next time it came knocking, it carried desperation sharp enough to pierce even the walls I had so carefully built. Looking back now, I can see the journey for what it truly was. For years, I thought my worth depended on how well I could hold my family together, how perfectly I could orchestrate every detail of their happiness. I believed that if I gave enough of myself, if I worked hard enough, they would see me, value me, and finally love me without conditions. But what I discovered was something far more important. You cannot make people appreciate what they are determined to dismiss. You cannot pour endlessly into others who see your devotion only as a duty. When my parents and Sophie turned on me, it shattered something inside me, but it also freed me. Their betrayal forced me to stop measuring my value by their approval. It gave me the space to step back, to look around, and to realize I already had everything I needed in the circle of people who chose to love me without demands. My husband's quiet strength, my son's unwavering loyalty, my niece's fierce defense, and the laughter of friends and neighbors who simply showed up. Those were the threads of real family. Breaking free didn't mean shutting down my heart. It meant redirecting it. I learned that joy doesn't come from perfection or sacrifice that leaves you empty. It comes from being present with people who meet you halfway, who lift as much as they take, who see your effort as love rather than obligation. That is the lesson I carry now. And it is the lesson I want to leave with you. If you find yourself giving everything and receiving only silence in return, remember this: you are allowed to step back. You are allowed to protect your peace. So today I live lighter, I laugh louder, I host dinners that are simple, messy, and real. And for the first time, I feel like I belong at my own table. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And leave me a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts. Tell me, have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most just to finally find peace?